So it's now my very, very great pleasure to welcome to REconomy L.I.F.T Andrew Sims, who is co-director of the New Weather Institute. He's Research Associate with the Centre for Global Political Economy at the University of Sussex, Fellow at the New Economics Foundation, author, analyst, and predominantly possibilista. That's an invented word, but it's one I hope you appreciate. And
thank you very much.
Welcome.
And I should probably declare an interest as well and say that I'm on the board of the Transition Network as well. Although speaking in an individual, oh dear, I've just turned it off. I've just ruined the graphics. My first act, an act of guerrilla terrorism. Oh, it's back. Shall I make it go away again? Come back. Oh, and it's back. Well, now really I've broken it. Hello. Last night, I had one of those conversations with my 12-year-old daughter when there was something on TV, and I won't go into the details, but it ended up in me having to kind of explain that the words cannabis, marijuana, hash, spliff, and dope were basically all the same thing. And I put that to the back of my mind until I arrived here, and I was walking up the stairs, and I thought, I'm being stalked, because I saw this cinema poster that said, Stakeout on Dope Street. And it said, when teenagers get dope. And the reason that haunted me is that my daughter turns 13 next week. But I've never been to the Cinema Museum before. I used to work about half a mile around the corner for years. Never been here before. How amazing is this building? It's completely fantastic. And I've just got a few things to say, and I was struck of all the things that you can say in the time slots we have in events like this. How does one ever choose one's word? And I'm always kind of really cautious about taking up people's time, because there's that kind of old saying about, you have, why does a meeting last for 3 hours when everything's been said in the first 60 minutes? And the answer is usually because everybody hasn't said it yet. And it strikes me that I don't know if I can tell you anything new, but I've been asked to give a few contextualizing remarks about our project, about our challenge, about our movement, about our social experiment. So I thought I'd say a few things about the urgency of our task, about the relevance of our task, about the confidence and the wholeheartedness, creativity and energy with which it must be approached, and also, and very, very importantly, the joy which can be had in the process, as well as hopefully the better world it will bring. So I'm going to say a few things about where we're at, or where I think we're at, a few open questions for transition itself, a couple of little concrete practical examples which relate to the geographical place that we're in, London and wider area, around a little bit about aviation and energy, and about how we actually think of London itself. And then just a few words about capturing the common sense in the middle of the environment, the political environment that we find ourselves. So first of all, where we're at, and the relevance of transition, because we find ourselves in the middle of a story about how it seems the economy has to work, and that's summed up in the word austerity. It's like this grand legitimating narrative that weirdly feeds off the failure of the very economic model it promotes. And what's relevant about transition is that it gives us a different story. I mean, just yesterday, in terms of how willfully and tenaciously dysfunctional the economy can be, we had news of the bank RBS making, which is largely publicly owned, we own it, you and I, 7 billion in losses. Its practices seem to willfully, on occasion, undermine the very small businesses that the banking system is meant to be there to support. A perfect inversion of the original purpose of our financial architecture. And yet, in spite of those 7 billion losses, it was paying 340 million in executive bonuses, which by bizarre coincidence happens to be the amount of money lost to low-paid people in the UK through the abandonment of the rise in the minimum wage. But transition has a lot to say about money, how it's made, where it comes from, how it circulates in the local economy. We've got news also of something rather tragic happening to the business rates, which are fed for everyone here who's interested in land and property issues, influenced by the random value that buildings take on. And it looks like it's going to be a hammer blow to micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. And transition, REconomy and L.I.F.T, I really have mucked up the graphics, haven't I? Just noticed, never mind. I have no pictures to show you, so I don't have to worry about that. That's one of the nice things about going low carbon in presentation and not having a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint can't go wrong. Of course, I can still go wrong, but the PowerPoint can't go wrong. And I kind of cut my carbon emissions ever so slightly. So business rates, but transition has the most enormous range of practical suggestions about how we evolve thriving, diverse, vibrant local economies. One of the things I've worked on over the last few years is tracking the rise in carbon emissions to the point where the likelihood is that we will no longer be able to stay below the 2-degree temperature rise threshold. I did this thing at the same time that we published a report called the Green New Deal a few years ago, where we worked out that it was basically we had about 100 months. Now that 100 months elapsed at the end of last year. And to do a kind of a reality check on it, I got in touch with about 4 dozen of the world's leading climate scientists and asked them if they thought it was any longer likely that we would stay below 2 degrees. And nobody did. 1 or 2 people said it was still possible, but nobody thought it was any more likely that we would. So if we find ourselves with the need to radically reimagine the whole economic system and get a grip on this sort of planetary reality of the challenge that we face, well, once again, transition is a place where we can look. And the other thing which is conditioning a lot of what's going to happen over the next few years, of course, is the way that nationally we have voluntarily entered the turmoil of leaving the European Union, and with beautiful unintended symbolism, the Department for Exiting the European Union is now housed in the abolished offices of the Department for Energy and Climate Change. And the reason I find the great sadness, whatever you think about the politics of Europe, the fact that at this critical moment, this critical juncture, our entire bureaucratic and political system is going to be geared up with rewriting decades worth of legislation and engaged, bizarrely, paradoxically, for a political movement that said it was against red tape and bureaucracy in Brussels. We have embarked upon possibly the biggest bureaucratic exercise this country has ever seen. And in that context, it's ever more important that the actual practical, tangible delivery of people like you working at the local level on real economic projects comes to the fore. Now, the tiny little bit of positivity that we can look to, perhaps, is that embraced in the new approach of government is a recommitment, a kind of rediscovery of the idea of an industrial strategy. Now, what's so critical about that, of course, from a Conservative government's point of view, is that it re-embraces the idea that you can intervene in the marketplace. There's a glimmer of hope there. Now, unfortunately, where they're looking in terms of that industrial strategy is the 3 H's. That's Heathrow expansion, Hinkley C PowerPoint, and HS2. And on each of those, I like to think that the transition movement has some rather more intelligent things to say about transport policy and energy policy overall. Now, there's a huge challenge to parts of the economy which is dependent upon migrant labour, and once again some of the most brilliant and insightful and cohesive contributions the transition movement has to make is around those parts of the economy to do with our food system, to do with community coherence and the support that we give to people from other communities who come to this country. So a couple of open questions, and I mean these literally like that. These are open questions I have in my mind about where transition goes from here. And with politics more broadly being in a state of disarray, and we struggle for that attractive counter-narrative. that transition itself has something of a challenge, and this is a conversation which actually came up in the last board meeting of the Transition Network, in that as we seek kind of connection and openness, we're evolving a language of transition which brings us together. It gives the people in this room a shared understanding of what we do. It can bind us. But whenever something like that happens, there's always another side to it. And we need to be aware of the way in which a specialized language can also create hurdles for other people who are not of the initiated inner circle of transition for coming in. So when we use acronyms, when we use new terms, even terms that we have for naming today, like REconomy and L.I.F.T, and when we talk about inner transition, we need to be aware of how we make ourselves continually open to as broad a part of the community as possible. I was looking around at a couple of the different Transition Town websites before I came here today, and a great pathos and sadness overcame me when I saw on one site, for example, that the Heart and Soul group were no longer active this year. And I thought, that's absolutely terrible. I felt slightly differently when I saw on another site that you were invited to, quote, have a deeper experience of Halloween, and to please bring along an object that represents an ancestor. All kinds of things came to mind now. It did actually make me think, what would I have done in that circumstance? And I have an ancestor, a great-grandfather, who was a bare-knuckled boxer who used to make his living by going around fairgrounds. And I thought maybe I should just bring a knuckle, something like that. That would be my ancestor. But one of my favourites, does anybody know what the acronym WWMD is? This is from another transition website. It's what would Monty do? I quite like that one. I'll keep that one. Anyway, as an example of how I think we can have confidence in our message and the way in which transition has something to say to everybody's everyday concerns, and I think this is where the importance of language comes in. As we asked ourselves in the teeth of the financial crisis and the banking crisis back in 2007, when we launched the idea of the Green New Deal as a sort of a transitionary program to kind of open the doors to large-scale, bottom-up transition. We asked ourselves, how should we be communicating this? And how can it speak to people's day-to-day concerns about where they are in the economy? So we spoke about a massive environmental transformation of the economy to tackle that triple crisis of the financial crisis and climate change and the problems with the economy, insecure energy supplies. But we made it in such a way that we talked about how these responses could create jobs, more jobs, and secure jobs. We talked about how investment now to tackle the malaise in the economy was an investment for the future, and how we can spend better by reforming taxes, dealing with tax havens and reporting, which were popular political concerns at the time. How we needed to tax more of what we want less of, like pollution and reckless speculation, and less of what we want more of, like green goods and services and jobs. We talked about new checks and balances for the banking system, which still hasn't been held to account. We talked about greater security for our pensions and savings, and how local and regional savings could go into the new green infrastructure. We talked about warm homes in winter, and how we can protect ourselves from high and volatile energy prices. And I think it's really important to never lose sight of the simplicity of the ultimate message. And I go back to that now famous cartoon which pictured a scene at a climate summit where somebody's got a slide up, somebody did have a PowerPoint, talking about the benefits of action, which were clean water, air, healthy children, livable cities, green jobs, comfortable homes, warm and cool when you need, saving rainforests, insulating from energy shocks. And there's two guys at the back, one saying to the other, but what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? So how do we connect this kind of beautiful, enabling, bubbling up social experiment of transition with the challenge of delivering it in time? That's another one. Can we ask what transition would look like as a movement if it was actually happening at a rate and scale that would solve the problem? And if that's potentially a worrying thought, a paralyzing thought, does that mean we just ignore it and don't ask the question of what it might take and just kind of hope for the best? What would the enabling policy framework look like to allow transition successfully to scale out like that? Now, I think here, there's some interesting signs, shifts in the debate, new issues coming onto the mainstream agenda, like around universal basic income, like around the shorter working week. But we're in London, and I just wanted to kind of mention a couple of practical examples, things where we're in the middle of making big decisions about our future. And one of the obvious ones, and the reason this is so important, of course, is that we lock in an infrastructure which is antithetical to transition. We have a major problem, and aviation is one of the biggest issues. I was listening to the Today programme yesterday. There was a Heathrow spokesperson who was very specifically asked the question about whether or not expansion would be compatible with carbon and our carbon limits, and he very deftly responded by completely ignoring the point. I got a leaflet through my door from Wandsworth Council. I was kind of pleased to see it was kind of anti-Heathrow. I read it a little bit more closely, and there was no mention of climate change as an issue whatsoever. And then when it got to the bottom, the anti-Heathrow stance was on the basis that they would just rather we built it at Gatwick instead. And I thought, somewhere somebody's missed the point. Even the Times reported that Heathrow's been overvalued to the economy to the tune of about 86 billion. And a study that L.I.F.T did a while ago showed how there was a net destruction of economic value through its expansion. And the crazy thing about all of this is, over half the UK population don't, in fact, fly even once a year. The work that's been done to show that 70% of flights stem from just 15% of the population. And that when you scratch the surface of that as well, asking these kind of big fundamental questions. A lovely bit of research done by someone at the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research at Manchester University found another twist, that apparently the people who are most likely to fly are residents of the districts of the City of London, Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea, and some parts of Surrey. And then it gets even more interesting, because the places they're flying to also just happen to be, by and large, known tax havens. So, do we make our future hostage to this very small section of the population engaged in slightly dodgy activities? Now, Chris Grayling, as the transport spokesperson, when he was kind of put on the spot about Heathrow, he said, government is about asking, what do we need to secure our future? Now, it seems a stable climate is not something which has occurred to him yet. Transition comes back, and one of the most beautiful examples, literally kind of in the teeth of the challenge, Grow Heathrow, Transition Heathrow, on the ground, asking the question, saying that they're fed up with saying no to things, and they want to say yes to things, and there they are on the ground delivering it. Now, energy is obviously kind of one of our big background issue, and if anything, it was when we were all talking about peak oil back in the middle of the last decade, it was one of the great foundation stones upon which the transition movement initially emerged. And it matters to remember the scale of what we're talking about, and the idea that on this landmass here, the United Kingdom, the first human footsteps were felt, as far as we know, about 700,000 years ago. And yet the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere above our head are now at a level which we haven't seen since the Pliocene era, 3 to 5 million years ago, long before modern humans evolved. We often talk about gambling with our future as a kind of an abstract metaphor. I notice now it's actually possible to really do that. You can get odds on when the next huge chunk of the Larsen Sea ice shelf is going to carve into the ocean from the bookies' Paddy Power. If you want to get a swift bet in now, they were offering odds of 7 to 2 that it would happen this month. If you want slightly better odds, you can wait until August, when the odds are 12 to 1. We're in bizarre times, strange times. Again, going from Europe down to the London scale, about 500,000 people suffer premature deaths each year due to air pollution. In London, during one pollution episode, it's estimated that there were 300 premature deaths linked to air pollution, and estimates range up to about 9,000 a year. Yet if you want a symbol of the reinvention of the urban space and the power of the imagination, well, if you were to step outside and get the right vantage point, you'd be able to see the back of Tate Britain, you know, from a polluting inner city power station to something which is contributing to a power and energy to a vibrant cultural institution. The news is not entirely bad. Even some of the big institutes, even the big sort of mainstream establishment groups like the World Energy Council say that energy demand is going to peak per capita by 2030. Obviously there'll be more people on the planet then, so emissions will still be higher. But big things are happening in renewable energy at the global scale. Record level additions of wind power and solar power. 500,000 solar panels installed every day around the world last year. Now the UK's got about 14 gigawatts of wind power. China, in 1 year, installed 20 gigawatts. The US, 8 gigawatts. In China, it's estimated that 2 wind turbines were installed every hour in 2015. The price of renewables is falling off a cliff. You've got glorious examples, admittedly geographically specific, Costa Rica going a whole year on renewable power, but Portugal too, going for consecutive days based entirely on renewable power. Rapid shifts are happening everywhere. Even in America, we can see that the potential, the technology, the deliverability is there to get every state to 80 to 85% renewable by 2030 and 100% by 2050. But in Britain, again, with all of this potential on our doorstep, we are obsessed with investing in what will be the single most expensive single building project on the face of the planet with Hinkley C. In spite of the fact that if the same level of money were put into renewables, there would be not just a saving, a financial saving of somewhere between 30 and 40 billion pounds, but you would also have a more flexible, diverse and resilient energy infrastructure. And we know, as transition town initiatives engaged in delivering community energy, that the value to local communities, and even DEC admitted this, of having community-owned renewable schemes is 12 to 13 times more than privately owned, orthodox, old-fashioned energy projects. And we know that this works at scale. So in Germany, they've got 900 energy cooperatives who enjoy the right to sell energy directly to third parties. Final couple of things I wanted to say is just in terms of how one of the things that transition can do, most importantly, is tell this better story. A little while ago, I read proposed an idea called National Gardening Leave. It combined the shift to a shorter working week with widespread urban greening for both aesthetic and productive purposes. It pointed out all the benefits we know: health, well-being, employment, education, to the community, to the economy, to the environment. It pointed out again that even in dense urban spaces, these things are possible. A study of the most densely populated city in the United States, New York, found 6,000 acres that you could green urban space in. It's been proposed beautifully, and Lucy has been part of the attempt to popularise this, that we might reimagine London as a national park city in one deft act of reimagining, shifting our expectations of how we live in a space. If London was a national park, we'd assume it was there for all of us. It would reverse the creeping acceptance of the divisive privatisation of public space. We wouldn't let big business and finance rope off parts of it for wealthy access only. We'd leave vehicles outside, take public transport or the long walk in, cut pollution, breathe cleaner air. It's all about capturing the imagination and finding a new common sense. This stuff is not complicated. We do know what to do, but we seem to have a perception problem, a failure of the imagination. My favourite fact of the moment, this week anyway, is that the human brain needs less energy to function than an old-fashioned light bulb. So quite why we're in the mess that we're in, I'm not sure. Late in 2015, there was the discovery of the nearest Earth-like planet. It was announced. It was circling a star system called Wolf 1061. There was an exoplanet called Wolf 1061c, which was thought might be like a mini Neptune, and it might just be rocky and habitable. Cue acres of media coverage, wild romantic speculation that not only might there be life out there, but also there might be somewhere else for us to go in the galaxy if we make too much of a mess of our own oddly habitable home. Public figures like Richard Branson and Stephen Hawking should know better, urging us to look out and beyond for our own salvation. There was a problem though. It's 14 light years away. That may not sound much, but using Deep Space One technology, which is the best that we've got, it would take you about 267,000 years to get there. About 9,000 human generations. Just imagine your disappointment if once you got there, it was a bit like kind of Magaluf on a Friday night. Because, you know, when you go to these places you haven't been to before, you can't guarantee what it's going to be like. Then they found another place. You know, if you think that's too far away, they found another one, Proxima Centauri b. And this one is much closer. It's only 4 light years away, or 76,000 years to get to. Oh yeah, and it's also got no days to speak of in the conventional sense. It's locked in one of those weird geostationary orbits where you're scorched by the sun on one hand and deep frozen on the other. And it's also subject to deadly solar flares. Now all the time, the effort and the speculation going into search for life out there, perhaps we need to wake up and realise that we are the life we seek out there. And the most beautiful thing about transition is that it celebrates and reconnects us to the glorious ground beneath our feet and the people who live next door to us, the plants we grow and the things that we make. It's a future that we can help people sense and taste and touch and feel. You know, it's not even asking that much of people, because about half of global emissions at the moment are the responsibility of just 1 in 10 of the global population. If just this group reduced their carbon footprints to that of the average, barely impoverished European, global emissions would be cut by about 1/3. So I think we've got the stories, I think we've got the people, I think we've got the ideas, I think we've got things proven on the ground that can give us a better story to tell. It might feel like it's paradigm shift or bust, but paradigms do shift and old ones do drift away. And I think our future is one of finding a sort of counter-audacity which is founded on these adjacent possibilities that we're here to celebrate today. So thank you for listening, and I shall hand you back to our lovely organisers.